And we're live.
Hello and welcome to CMSWire's Google Plus Hangout. It's great to have you here. We do apologize that there were some technical difficulties and the delay. So thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you here. This is CMSWire's Google Plus Hangout. Tough choices. The Hillary Clinton compliance or convenience conundrum. And we have a terrific panel for you today. My name is Mimi Dion. I'll be the moderator or facilitator, if you will, of this Google Plus Hangout. But our panel that is joining us is comprised of some wonderful information governance experts, and I can't wait to get started. So why don't I just pass the floor in alphabetical order to our who will briefly introduce themselves, and then we can move on to the core of the discussion, which is a sort of a wrap-up of the developing events over the past week in this email management story. So if Todd Turner is not with us yet, so I'm going to pass it to Nick Inglis. Nick, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Absolutely. I'm Nick Inglis. I'm the co-founder of the Information Governance Conference, InfoGovCon, as well as a founding partner of the consulting firm Optismo.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us, Nick.
Thank you.
I'm also going to invite Laura Livingston to introduce herself. Go ahead, Laura.
Hi, I'm Laura Livingston. I'm a certified records manager and a certificated litigation paralegal, and I'm just delighted to be here to talk about this very interesting subject with such great people.
And not only that, but you should all know that Laura deserves the credit for as soon as it began, the first thing once she heard that this developing story was happening, she contacted me and said, "This is the hangout we must do, and this is the panel that we must have." So thank you, Laura, for the idea.
My pleasure.
Mr. Jesse Wilkins, introduce yourself, please.
Sure. I'm the Director of Research and Development at AIM. I'm a certified records manager as well, and I'm also a very huge political junkie, and I follow 300 blogs a day from all over the political spectrum. So I'm looking forward to this sort of in the background as the politics as well, which is not part of the topic for today.
Correct, correct. Thank you so much for saying that, Jesse. Everyone who is on Twitter and watching, you can follow the discussion and participate with us at the hashtag ClintonEmailsIG, and we will be looping you into the conversation quite a bit. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us because we feel as if you're fully participating in the Hangout today. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce the conversation, sharing a comment from the dress rehearsal yesterday evening. Jesse, you said something that really stood out to me, and that was, this story is the ultimate BYOD writ large. And I was hoping you could expand on that for our audience to sort of set up the story a bit, and then we're going to move on to the compliance versus convenience ramifications.
Sure. Yeah, one of the things that I think a lot of organizations are struggling with right now is this notion of bring your own device, right? We've all got our own smartphones, our own tablets, and increasingly we're doing work using those devices as well. And so I brought that comment up that this is BYOD writ large because we're not talking about just a device, of course, or even a personal email account. It's a whole freaking server. So it raises a lot of questions from a variety of perspectives that I think we're going to cover today. It certainly was a surprise to me, not so much the use of private email, which I've seen come up with probably far too much frequency, but this notion that somebody would, inadvertently set up their entire email server using their own hardware, their own software in their house, that's not something I think is very common.
Well, we think it's not very common, but one of the...
We hope it's not very common.
One of the comments that we made yesterday as a group was, we wonder if it is more common than previously thought. Nick, what are your thoughts on the information governance ramifications? And if you would, please explain how compliance fits into information governance and give us an overview that for the purpose of our audience, and then for the benefit of our audience, and then talk a little bit about your immediate first thoughts when you heard about the story as it was breaking.
Yeah, well, compliance fits firmly atop every framework, and is in itself or its parent, risk management, an equal partner with other disciplines like records management and IT, legal, in developing a cohesive and comprehensive information governance program at any organization, whether it's a company, a nonprofit, or in this case, a governmental entity. So I think the part of this story that is most interesting to me is really imagining the role of the watchdog. So who should have been raising the red flag on Clinton's lack of email being sent for records keeping after month 1? Whether those emails should have been sent to NERA as an ongoing piece of her role as Secretary of State during her tenure, or if they should have been delivered upon her departure as Secretary of State. Either interpretation withstanding, it didn't happen, and we're only now learning about that. Worse yet, it's now come to light that, in fact, the preceding administration Secretary of State, Colin Powell, likewise used a personal email account, as since has delivered nothing for record keeping. So the role of the watchdog hasn't existed. So the problem I see is really a structural one, where NERA or some other governmental agency should have the capability to play watchdog across the government, so that if an individual or a department or an agency is out of compliance with directives, they can punish the offender in some way, shape, or form. I don't know what that punishment looks like. The problem is that NERA receives its funding, however little it is, from the government, and it's historically been very poorly funded, considering their very extensive mandate. So the government is paying for its own potential watchdog. And the only parallel that I can think of this structure is over in the financial sector, where the banks paid for their own ratings agencies to rate their own bank bonds. And that structure worked out so very well for the American economy. I really do hate to pick on NERA, because they really have made some great strides forward, and they've needed to deal with wave after wave of technology advancing in record keeping with ridiculously limited funds. But if they are going to play the role of watchdog without the capabilities to actually punish the offenders, in the very least, if they don't have the capability to punish, why didn't they raise the red flag and inform the public when they received nothing from Clinton, or worse yet, from the prior administration with Colin Powell? Since they didn't raise the red flag, they allowed the behavior to continue, seemingly, as these new reports are coming out, for well over a decade. And I think what we'll hear next is how NERA defines its role not as a watchdog. We haven't heard that yet, but at least from anything that I've seen. But NERA moving its role, no, we're not the watchdog. That's probably the GAO that should be that watchdog. But GAO, is, as far as I know, doesn't have any mandate to be the watchdog over NERA's activities. So really, there's no one watching at all.
Who's watching the Watchmen? Yeah. You know, it's interesting. In my research leading up to today's event, I read this fascinating article by the New York Times, and an author at the New York Times, and they said, you know, the one thing that hasn't really been shared, and this was an anonymous source, of course, one of the key aspects that hasn't been shared yet is that the executive in charge of the State Department is the final decision maker on what is confidential, what is classified, and what is not. And so, you know, I debate that myself. Is it fair to I should say, what's fair? We know the executive in charge at the time, Hillary Clinton, should have been informed what the expectations were, but in that give and take between herself and that department and NERA, you know, did she have the autonomy to say, I've set up my own personal, you know, well, obviously a personal framework, but I've set up, you know, my decision guidelines, my criteria of what I determine is classified and what is not, and you could see it in the public statement written that that's exactly I'm the decider, and I'll choose what is turned over. But in the interest of transparency, here's a section of 55, 60,000, a selection of them. And I almost have to stop and congratulate Mrs. Clinton because of those emails that she deleted, I read in the same article that it was almost an average of 20 personal emails a day, and how she managed to be a world leader, a leader on the world stage and still write 20 personal emails a day. I think she could sell a time management class in the future. But I just wonder about the balance between the expectation of NARA when clearly the guidelines were, I mean, up until 2 years ago when I visited a NERA class in Seattle, it was print and store, print and file, print and file, print and file. And we know some of the, at least some of the metadata limitations of that. And Jesse, I was wondering if you could expand a bit on that for the benefit of our audience, what the limitations of print and file are.
Well, sure. Depending on what systems were actually used to create the emails, we could have as many as 100 or more metadata fields that are stored in the header of the typical email message. And they reference everything from when an email was sent or received or opened to what the email was in response to, in case the subject line changed, etc. There's actually a field called in reply to.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we've really known for the better part of a decade now that printing information instead of making it available in its native or usable formats is really kind of certainly not best practice. I mean, we've known that since the 2006 changes to the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we could go back even further and look at one of the seminal email management cases dealing with the federal government, the Profs case from 1993, that basically made the same case. Printing emails is not really appropriate. More recently, in some of the coverage this week, I saw an article that noted that when you have to manage your information like this, you have to turn over the information. And the op-ed columnist made the case that in printing her emails, Hillary Clinton had really not done that. She hadn't turned over her information. She had turned over copies of, or images of, or something less than. And of course, now the specter is that somebody will have to take these 55,000 printed pages, scan them, OCR them, and index them in order to be able to search what was turned over. At the very least, I would think that that tends to frustrate the intent, which is to make that information from a public official searchable and available not only to classification and declassification experts, but to the archivists at NARA, and ultimately to the public that has a right to see what their public employees are doing ostensibly on their behalf. So yeah, I think it's a significant issue and one that hasn't gotten probably as much attention as some of these other issues.
And, you know, there was a mention on the listserv earlier today, and it was said so well. One of our colleagues, Larry Medina, said, so what happens to the headers, the dates, the distribution lists, the attachments, and everything else associated with the email messages, and how do they search them if they can't use the software applications that generated them? Laura Livingston is with us. She has practical experience in e-discovery. And I'm wondering, Laura, if you can comment a bit on the e-discovery ramifications of print and file as well.
Well, obviously, without the metadata, it makes it incredibly hard to determine, you know, a lot of things, and that information gives you ideas on whether or not the information has in the email has been tampered with or adjusted, and so it does bring some challenges when it's delivered in that way. But one of the things that we need to remind ourselves is that the policies at NARA, while there are many, there are some holes in them. One of them said that you can print emails, and they said that if you do not have the certain required software, if your ERMS requirements aren't as specified in the FedReg, then you can print emails. You're required to print emails, and so she can argue that she was doing exactly what the rule said, but I think we can all agree that she took this to the far edges of of delivery, she should have delivered it in electronic format, and one wonders, at this point, why that wasn't done. But I look at this and I see, like Nick talked about, there were no watchdogs. The rules have been changed. It was 21 months after she left. They amended the Federal Records Act to say that emails that are in other accounts other than your government accounts must be turned in within 20 days. But it doesn't say that you can't have a personal email account. You can't do it from a personal email account. And so to me, there's still a lot of holes here. Trying to get compliance where people are actually doing what they're supposed to be in the email accounts, in the federal email accounts, should say you shouldn't do anything other than in this account, and especially if you're at certain levels within the government agencies. If you're at a level of a cabinet post, it should all be done there. There has to be a level of transparency. So I'm just a little concerned. I looked at the National Law Journal articles, and they all say that there's really no recourse as far as a punishment unless there is some kind of evidence that she mishandled or destroyed classified information. Right now, the State Department says there's no indications that she improperly used her email for classified information. So I don't see that there's any kind of legal recourse at this point. This is just a horrible thing that is shedding light on a bigger problem, which is the rules are not as clearly written as they should be, and there is no one playing the watchdog with any level of effectiveness. And you've got to ask yourself, how many times was she trained on how to handle her email? How many times was her office audited? In the first month, this should have been identified as an issue, and it was not. And so I see a lot of failure on that end. So,
Mr. Todd Turner has joined us. Thank you so much, Todd. As a managing consultant at IBM, you've worked in the federal space for quite some time. And I was wondering if you could speak with us a little bit about when you've worked with federal clients, what has the general sense been there? And I'm not looking for specifics. I'm asking for general feedback about compliance training. Laura's important point about the issue of compliance and the training piece.
Well, one thing I will say is I've worked across about a half dozen different federal agencies, and some pay more attention than others. At a recent client I've been dealing with, I've asked a pointed question. You have had the agency's basic records management training, which is probably maybe a half hour, an hour's video type presentation. You also get a few questions along the way. I've taken it, but as a records management professional, I've seen this, so many times, the same thing in each federal agency. And for some people, it's just a check the box thing, and beyond that, it goes right by them. And so when you're working with them trying to improve their particular division or office's activities in records management, it's really hard.
Chris Walker joins us on Twitter, by the way. Thank you so much, Chris, for being here. I'm going to read just a few of his tweets very quickly. He says, if there's an expectation of employees to decide what to keep versus what to toss, we should be able to as well. And Jesse's response was true, but at the same time, there's a difference between deciding in situ versus a couple of years after the fact. And Chris responded, good point. Distance being relative, this is a couple of years after, time has passed, but it hasn't really passed in terms of the federal government evolving to embrace electronic records management by 2016. Todd, do you think it's realistic, given the budgets that these departments have put towards records management to date? Is it realistic? Do you think they'll make it to the 2016 deadline, or will they have intermittent progress because each one is unique? The environment of each one is unique, information technology environment, and is there some speculation about the different functions, whether whether, you know, who's going to make it to the finish line first.
I don't know that everyone's going to get there in time. And also, it's, you know, I'm looking at the presidential directive right here, and it's, you know, by 2016, federal agencies will manage both permanent and temporary email in an accessible electronic format. That might be a bit more realistic, especially you'll get that top layer through the capstone process where, you know, it's all just going to be skimmed off. There's wiggle room in the other one that talks about federal agencies managing permanent electronic records in electronic format by the end of 2019. But there's the out that says, you know, in as much as possible. They know not everything's going to be possible, but the question is how far will agencies push that to make it happen? Where I'm working right now, you know, they're trying. We're working with roadmaps. We're trying to get things in order so that the odds are in their favor.
May the odds be ever in your favor.
Yeah, I've helped write, you know, a number of roadmaps, a number of implementation plans. But, you know, a lot of times there's just no money to do it. So that's the big question. Is someone really willing to put the dollars out there that will make this happen?
Yeah. And one of the telling tales is that, you know, Jason Barron, when the government shutdown happened, he was laid off. He was furloughed as what did they say, essential personnel. Yeah. And so you realize at that point that, granted, you know, in the scheme of things, records management and information governance has its place, but they didn't consider the fact that as what little government was going on still needed to have that level of information governance, and you wonder how many people were actually watching the records at that point.
Yeah, and speaking to the different departments' development, you know, information technology and the information governance ramifications of that. I read too in my research, and Laura, we had a conversation earlier in the week about the lack of security on the server for the first 3 months of its life that this email sat on. You know, it resided in, I should say. You know, I can't help but think to myself, did Mrs. Clinton at the time think this is my only option? This worked well when Bill was in office. It's the same advice we used then. It's going to work now. And I can't help but wonder who were her advisors on this, and what is their level of influence across other departments as well? Just a rhetorical question I'm throwing out there.
Yeah, and I think that the thing that concerned me the most about that information was the fact that she was without a digital certificate for the first 3 months, which means it had no encryption. It would be open-ended, and that is a big concern. If you look back at some of the other secretaries of state, we talked about Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice had 0 emails, and I find that to be puzzling, because one has to ask yourself, you know, how can someone function without generating an email in society today? Now, whether or not she dictated to someone else what she wanted to convey and they conveyed it for her on her behalf, that would be a question to ask. So I don't know if this is, I think this is not necessarily a unique situation. I think this is more of a, it was revealed and it is now exposed a larger problem, which we get back to, which is the compliance, enforcement of compliance. You can have all kinds of policies in place, but if there's no one enforcing them and if there's no real consequence for failure to comply, you're not going to get a level of compliance that you require. And it at the level of a cabinet post, the value, not only archival but in nature, but just to manage the country at that point, you would think that there would be a special attention made for those types of positions. And so you have to ask yourself, was NERA given the resources to audit and monitor what they were doing, or were they just kind of, I don't know, allowed to do as much as they could, or were encouraged not to? I don't know that either, and that's a big question.
You know,
And I think.
oh,
Go ahead, Mimi.
please. Go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, well, what I was going to say is I certainly echo Laura's concerns with respect to the security stuff, and you have to imagine that a sitting Secretary of State has got to be one of the most high-value espionage targets on the planet.
Absolutely.
Right? And so we just don't know, not only our enemies, but our friends. Everybody spies on everybody else, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a bit disconcerting. I think part of the difference that I see, at least between Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice, and of course hindsight is always 20/20, but I wonder how much business was really being done in 2000, let's say, via email versus 2015. And I'm sure there was some. I'm likewise a bit surprised by the premise that there were no emails from either of her predecessors as Secretary of State. Just as I am surprised by her assertion that she didn't do any classified emails during her tenure. I think they all have about the same, frankly, the same level of credibility to me. And again, maybe somebody was doing it from the outside and on behalf of them. And I certainly, from an information security perspective, I certainly hope that's the case.
Oh, yeah.
But my background was in the Marines, and I had a top secret clearance, and I remember that being drilled into us on a regular basis that, you know, this stuff is important. This stuff has to be safeguarded. This stuff can't just be, you know, I couldn't just take our stuff and throw it in a recycle bin. We had to have a shredder on site for exactly that purpose. And in fact, ours was a pulverizer. And so I certainly hope that the precedent moving forward is secure, electronic, ideally using the State Department systems, and if there's a concern about that, whether it's in terms of convenience, security, whatever, that's got to be a more thoroughgoing discussion. In fact, I kind of wonder why we haven't asked the same question of the current Secretary of State with respect to what he's doing.
Exactly, and last night, Jesse, you talked about in our address about using a web platform to access from your smartphone. Can you kind of go into that a little bit more and explain how that could be a way of continuing to have the convenience of just one phone, but having a protection level?
Yeah, and this is something that we talked about also in the context of BYOD, right? I have my smartphone. AIM did not buy that for me. It's not AIM's phone, it's my phone, and so it's got a mix of personal and work-related things. Part of the way that you can kind of manage that risk, certainly if the device gets lost, if I retire, obviously we're not a federal agency, but if we were, one of the ways that you could mitigate that would be to use some sort of a web-based email interface such that when you retrieve your email, you're not really retrieving it and saving it to your device except as a collection of temporary web files. And so the actual emails would remain on the server at all times. Now again, in the case of the Clinton email server, that's still somewhat problematic because of it being her own server. But certainly from a typical employee's perspective, if you've got some sort of a web-based interface, it does make it a whole lot easier to both provide that access while not commingling personal and work-based emails inside the email store, and at the same time having a little bit better control over the security and ultimately the archiving and records management at the back end because it does all live on the server.
With the caveat that there's security on the actual device. So it doesn't matter if the actual messages are on the device. If you're logged in and you lose the device, and anyone can simply just go right to the server as well. So
right.
just
my employer requires that if I'm using my own device that it's encrypted, and boy is it encrypted. If I lose this thing and find it, they may have already killed everything of mine on this phone.
Yeah.
Yeah, at some of my employers, we've had the same thing. We've had applications similar to what Jesse is talking about, where the phone doesn't have anything on it really, and the timing out on the on logging in, if you're inactive, within a few minutes it's timed out, and you have to enter passwords and codes to get in. And so it's yep. I feel very comfortable with the idea that if I were to drop a phone in an airport or somewhere else, that that the access would be extremely limited unless they were incredibly talented, and obviously, you know, the phone would get, like you said, killed on the other side, so there wouldn't be that issue. But you know, Jessie does bring up the point with her server, her own server. There's still a lot of gray area there that even if she did access it via a web format, there's still that level of amateur nature, less than professional nature of a home server versus, you know, hopefully what we would consider the FedGov to have. So.
You know, it's interesting too, because when I was reading the coverage for the past couple of days, the server has since been taken down, if you will, but white hat hackers have still found its location within a block or two of Bill Clinton's foundation. So, you know, it isn't that hard. And the idea of defending, oh, its physical location where it was, as opposed to its location in the digital world, it's still astonishing to me that the realization either has sunk in and it doesn't want to be addressed, or it really hasn't sunk in. And we know that there are attorneys out there who are, you know, technologically not interested in the details. And Laura, you could probably speak a little bit to how a records manager can work with an attorney to make them more sympathetic to understanding the ramifications of their choices. The choice to not be technically proficient.
The hardest thing to do is try to convince an attorney of something that he doesn't want to believe in. So I'm not ever going to say I could do that. I think that the key is to remind anyone, whether they be an attorney or you know, an executive level person in a corporation, you just have to give them the bigger picture. Their actions may be a small pebble thrown into the lake, but the ripple effect can be felt. What we haven't really talked about is the fact that China, Russia, North Korea all have squadrons of people, and when I say squadrons, I mean in excess of 30, 40, 50, maybe even hundreds of people, that all they're doing all day long is trying to hack into the Pentagon, into the White House, into anywhere that they can get, you know, multinational financial entities, so they can create problems. And so, you know, it becomes even more important that everyone comply with the requirements that have been set by their organization, whether it be the federal government or a corporation. There is no certainty anymore that we can protect, even with the best precautions. So you've got to go as deep as you can in protection. You have to have as much armor as possible. Otherwise, it's all bets are off.
And it's interesting to know what that armor could be made of. I mean, we've really talked. I think we talked about this in the last Hangout. You know, the idea of what is platinum level and what is good enough and reasonable enough. When it comes to this role's emails, you know, obviously we think they deserve platinum service. Is it fair to say that her approach was good enough, and there's a difference because she was just uninformed? No, please, Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, go, Nick.
No, not since 1976, the Kozlowski versus Sears Roebuck. There was a decision that was made where the court said to allow a defendant, and I'm quoting it because I brought it up as we were saying it, to allow a defendant whose business generates massive records to frustrate discovery by creating an inadequate filing system and then claiming undue burden would defeat the purposes of the discovery rules. I'd say that the government counts as an organization that generates massive records, and not delivering those records would be defeating the purposes of discovery rules, or in this case, defeating the purposes of FOIA. You could even claim that, you know, her delivery of those emails on paper, instead of delivering them in the modern format, which is she should be clearly capable of doing, delivering them electronically with the header intact, is also creating undue burden. Mind you, this decision specifically says business, so she's likely exempt from it, yet the intent has been clear since this decision in 1976.
Yeah, but the Fed rule is still out there in 36 CFR that says if you don't have the capable requirements, then you can deliver it. So she's given the out. It's a very slim out, and it's inexcusable, but it's still there. And she's an attorney. At the end of the day, she is an attorney. She's going to find that little place of wiggle room that she can squeeze into, and she found it.
I want to go back, though. I want to go back to the question about security for a second, because I think that's a huge critical piece of this. I would argue, I think, that the assertion that it requires platinum level protection, I think, of the sitting Secretary of State is spot on. There's maybe a handful of emails that I think that would be more important to safeguard than hers, including her boss's probably. But at the same time, I don't think having your own server it comes anywhere near to good enough. And this is a discussion that I have actually with records people and with IT people all the time. Unless you are a world-class organization and you have dozens or hundreds of white hat hackers trying to hack you all the time and do that sort of penetration testing and that sort of, where you're also a high-value target for the black hacker community as well, like a Microsoft, like a Google, like a Citibank, like all these, larger entities, there's just no way that you can do as good security for yourself as another organization could. And so I don't care how good Hillary Clinton's staff was, there's simply no way that they were as good as the broader IT services that are provided by state, by whoever provides IT as a service within the State Department or within the federal government. There's just no way. And so that's the thing I think that concerns me the most. And so having a web-based email ameliorates that to some extent, subject to a lot of the caveats that we've already talked about. But I think it's also the case that there's a reason why the expectations are not set to have everybody set up their own email servers. I mean, if not, why not have a server in the White House, right? It would be just as secure and just as robust, except that's the whole point. It really isn't as secure or as robust. And so when we have people who are not subject matter experts, and here I'm talking specifically about this sort of hacking and penetration testing, making these sorts of decisions that, oh, well, we'll do it on our own. That's really not a good idea, I don't think. And in fact, I would actually argue that it's a very good reason in many organizations to move to some of these cloud-based services, because again, Google hires lots and lots of really smart people and incentivizes them to hack their systems. And so does Amazon and everybody else.
Information security is like cotton nowadays. It's the fabric of our lives. I mean, so, and Nick, you were about to bring up a point of Adams versus Dell.
Yeah, so in 2009 there was another decision here. It's Philip Adams and Associates versus Dell. This was in Utah, I believe. A court, and more importantly, a litigant, is not required to simply accept whatever information management practices a party may have. A practice may be unreasonable given responsibilities to third parties, and I'll stop there for a second. The third parties in this case are the American public. The government has a responsibility to the American public in this case. While a party may design its information management practices to suit its business purposes, one of those business purposes must be accountability to third parties. Given that, mind you, the federal statutes can say whatever they like, but the standard should be current litigation practices, and the government should be held to those same standards that any organization on the face of the planet should be held to, which is, yes, those practices for federal procedures may be absolutely meeting your specific needs, government entity. However, you are not meeting the needs of the third parties. In this case, the third parties are the American public. There's case law around this topic, but specifically applied to business. And for some reason, the government continues to raise its hand and say, "Oh no, not us. We're not held to that same standard." But I'm sorry, the government should be held to an even higher standard because they're accountable not only to their clients or their customers as well as their shareholders, but every single member of the American public.
And that's an important point, but I think that the question to ask is how much of the federal budget is set aside for NERA, and then you have to ask how do you make that case in light of everything else. The lowest bid traditionally wins in a federal contract, do they not, Todd?
In many cases. What I was about to bring up, I don't think the question is how much of our money goes to NERA. More of the activity actually happens at the agency level. Now, mind you, NERA provides guidance. NERA preserves records with enduring value, and they, on behalf of the agencies, store records, which are charged back now to the agencies. The bigger question is agency budgets and agency priorities.
And should it? I mean, we've seen on the corporate side the move away from department by department budgeting for information management and records management capabilities. Organizations aren't doing that at the department level anymore. It's now being centralized and being managed with a comprehensive strategy. The government doesn't have that comprehensive strategy, and it's lagging greatly behind the public sector.
Yeah. And one has to ask at this point, do you, if NERA is just looking at it from an archival historical sense, then who should be looking at it proactively from an information security angle? Should it be, the national, security level? Should it be somebody at the Pentagon? Should it be, who would you put in charge of maintaining that security level? Who are the responsible parties at that point?
I'm not sure, but when they're ready to hire a consultant, I think there are several people that would be willing to help them figure that problem out.
and that's it's the same, when you talk about advising agencies in terms of records management, and when you go to information security or systems architecture, you've got people like OMB who set standards such as Circular A130, but watchdogging that is a whole other story.
Exactly.
And implementing that it's all on the agencies.
Yeah, and see, that's the big problem I see, is that there's just no one doing it, doing the watchdogging at the level that needs to be done, where there are consequences for not following the process in the way you should. And who would that be? That group be? Because I look at it as the security level, especially for a Secretary of State, has got to be massive.
Yeah.
And I wonder if, Jesse, you can speak to, as your past experience in the military, of the idea that there should be multiple parties interested in such an information security framework. Considering her role, I would think, and you may disagree with me, but I would think that even the Department of Defense would be interested in providing analysts to her, for both her physical protection of the server as well, its protection in the digital age. What are your thoughts on a cross-functional committee that would provide some guidance and insight?
Well, of course. The first stipulation is she shouldn't have her own physical server, and therefore there's no need for the physical security. But yeah, more broadly, I think there are certainly a lot of different stakeholders. NERA ostensibly works on behalf of the American people from the perspective of preserving the permanent stuff. The information security stuff that we've identified is a huge deal. We've got, I think, a lot of other stakeholders that need to be involved in this, and so I guess my concern would be there are entities that do this at the federal level federal enterprise-wide. The CIO Council, the Federal Information and Records Management Council, and there are others, and Todd's probably got a better handle on these than I do, but there are these things that purport to set those sorts of standards of practice, best procedures, technical standards, etc., enterprise-wide. I think the challenge is, as Laura and others have noted, how do you then drive that down one level into the Department of State, into the Department of Revenue, into, and even perhaps one level deeper, where it's not just Department of Treasury. We don't have Revenue, we have Treasury, but it's the IRS. It's the FBI, it's Secret Service, it's those major agencies and bureaus within the departments, because that's really where the rubber kind of meets the road. And I don't know, unfortunately, that we're going to see a CIO council type of construct at the department, bureau, or agency level. That's probably what's needed. I just don't think we're going to see it, in no small part because as others have said, there's only so many resources, and rightly or wrongly, it's not been perceived to be that much of a big deal. I mean, NERA's been doing these IG reports and others for years and years and years. Like every other year for the last 8 or 10 years, NARA's been putting out these reports that say, yeah, federal records management's still really not that good, and here's where it's okay, and here's where it's marginal, and the rest of you just kind of suck out loud. And okay, well, has it changed materially since the last report or the report before that? No, and if not, is that a function of money and therefore prioritization of resources? Is it a function of some departments having the right people in place who know what they're supposed to do and do it because it's the right thing to do, not because they're going to get punished necessarily, or because they realize the value of better information management? And isn't that kind of a lot of what we're trying to push for? I don't know what would be needed to effect that change, and what I'm concerned is that the Managing Records Directive that says email by 2016, permanent electronic records by 2019, I think there's a lot of folks in the broader IM community that are concerned that that lack of resources is really going to be the thing that kills it. It's planned sufficiently, but it's not seen as a priority.
Right, and then I worry that I'm almost glad this happened because it does set the conversation, going, and I'd rather it be this than a breach that has been or a hacking, event that's been successful from either China or Russia. But I'm wondering, is it going to take something of that kind of catastrophic nature to get the right funding or to get the right movement in the direction to do the right things? And I'm hoping this is the thing that serves as the catalyst, that this conversation will motivate, but I don't think it has the level of catastrophe, for want of a better word, to make this a story more than 5 or 6 days on the newswire.
Well, is this a big enough story that's going to get enough members of Congress to pass new legislation to provide either the funding or the enforcement ability to NERA? I'd say this is a no. Because they're looking at it as, and pardon me if I slip into the political side, but since both sides of the aisle have allegations on them that they've done pretty nearly the exact same thing, who is going to have the political will to force these changes, knowing that they might be the ones that these changes affect in the next administration cycle?
It's the fox and the hen house thing.
Well, I will say that we are getting attention on the Hill. I'm a member of the Armor Board of Directors, and I was recently on the Hill with one of our staff people talking to Representative Cummings, thanking him for his sponsorship of the amendments to update the Federal Records Act and Presidential Records Act. So we had a few minutes with him, and it's an interesting topic, and hopefully he can get his friends on the other side of the aisle to work with him and get some bipartisan records management and information governance efforts going.
Yeah, I think though we're sort of coming around full circle to the key challenge there, and I think I share Nick and Laura's fear that it really is going to take some sort of a critical breach, like
yeah.
the president's emails being stolen by Edward Snowden or some such, because nobody thinks it's going to happen to them, right? I mean, every other agency head right now should be quaking in their boots thinking, oh God, am I doing that? Do we have people doing that? But I'm sure they're not. Even if they are doing it, I'm sure they're thinking, well, I haven't gotten found out yet, so I don't really need to worry about it. Well, neither did Mrs. Clinton until about 6 weeks ago. And so, yeah, I think it's going to take a major, to quote Laura, a catastrophe of information security before we're actually going to see that. And of course, we had the Snowden thing, and what did that change?
Nada.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that one was seen more as a lone entity who was who had a personal agenda. I think it ended up becoming that in the spin that was put on by either the press or wherever. But I think that the knowledge that there are people who don't like the United States, who are actively trying to breach us, should be enough of a motivation. The conversation that I've had with many of my friends is that the next world war will be bloodless. It will be a cyber war, and there will be a very quick overthrow of whatever person is attacked, because all it takes is one successful hack to gain ground, and then you are able to travel through and eventually get to the center, and then all is lost. And so I look at this event as tied with the Snowden event. If you want to say here's another another reason why we need to do this, I don't even want to try to compare them as far as the catastrophic event, but this may be our 1993 World Trade Center attack that's warning us that another one is coming that's going to be bigger, and that we need to address it.
Well, I'm sure the Snowden event, if you will, changed things for the CIA and how they manage information. The structure. There's the structural issue of each department doing their own thing that's problematic. If there's going to be a system-wide or governmental-wide change, will there need to be some sort of catastrophic event? I certainly hope not. Hopefully there's enough cards that have lined up here that the writing's on the wall, and we don't need that to happen in order for the changes to be made. But I'm sure the Snowden event changed how that department, the CIA, is handling their information, and hopefully this Clinton scandal is going to change how things are handled, at least in the at least in the State Department. Hopefully that would be executive-wide and governmental-wide, but that remains to be seen.
So, not to, because I don't want to end on such a depressing note, as I recognize it's Friday, but I don't want to quote catastrophe if we can help it.
Don't call me Debbie Downer. I'm not going to take
the
that.
Roland Emmerich G+ Hangout, people. So let's end on a positive note and talk about what you all are working on in your professional endeavors, what you are optimistic about in terms of, the industry, at least. I think the information governance industry has paid close attention to this. If there's any indication of that on our records management listserv, our professional listservs, at the very least, and never mind the private conversations we've all had, because goodness knows we're all networked into each other. What do you think the information governance industry is going to take from this? And this is a round robin I'm throwing out to each of you in alphabetical order, so we'll start with Todd. And then also, what are the topics that are interesting you the most, and the responsibilities, like Todd, for example, your excuse me, board leadership. What are you doing to better the field, better the the marketing of the field, and what can we look forward to for you in the coming year?
Well,
Todd, we'll start with you.
Obviously, the ARMA board is trying to improve our noticeability within the industry. There are many competing associations now. Other places people can gather training and information. We're trying to push the board, push ARMA forward, making sure it stays prominent within the industry. Personally, I think there are a lot of people out there. I meet lots of people at client offices. They have a want for improving managing their information. Most of them just want to know how. What can they do to make it better? They've got day jobs. Making sure the records get where they're supposed to go when someone's done with a case is, way down on the list of importance. So maybe more automation, so that you do these functions without really knowing you're doing these functions. Obviously, there's more funding needed in private industry records management as well as with our government colleagues.
Okay, Nick, I'm going to pass the floor to you. How do you respond? What are you looking forward to?
Well, I'm looking forward to the continued maturation of the industry, and the government actually taking a step from the private sector where things have advanced quite quickly, and clearly the government is lagging behind really desperately. The discussions that we've had in the past are moving more closely towards the technology that we have available, and the non-technologically advanced folks that permeated the industry throughout in the past are retiring and moving away from the industry, and I feel as though that's likely a positive change. For the shout out and things I have going on, InfoGovCon is a part of the IG initiative. We have the Chief Information Governance Officer Summit happening May 20th and 21st. We'd love to invite folks from the government to come and join us. And the Information Governance Conference 2015 is in the end of September into October in Hartford. And also
beautiful Hartford.
Beautiful Hartford that time of year. That time of year only. No offense to those in Hartford. The leaves start to turn and it gets beautiful.
Oh.
I'm also a founding partner of Optismo, which is a consulting firm, and we have an open source model for information governance for all to utilize, including governmental agencies or secretaries of state, which is at optismo.com/IG.
Fabulous. Laura, what about you?
Well, I'm very excited because I've kind of been feeling like ever since I joined the records management field almost 20 years ago, I've always felt that information governance was what I was doing, and so the fact that I feel like we've kind of caught up to that, I'm very excited about that. One of the projects I'm working on right now is more change management in nature, but I think it's something we all are feeling in the workplace. I'm trying to move an organization towards a paper light environment, getting them off of hard copy. And you do find that while it does seem to go generational in nature, there are still those certain folks that you would not expect to be in love with paper that are in incredible love with paper. And so I think in about a year I'm going to have a lot of information that I definitely want to share regarding the change management success or failure I may experience in the next few months. So I'm looking forward to that. And once again, I'm so excited to be part of this panel because these are people that I admire and I respect. Their expertise has always been something that I've learned from, and so I really feel like we could talk for probably another hour about this and not cover everything we want to cover. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much for the idea, Laura. And moving on, Jesse?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating time to be in the industry because I think we are moving towards a more holistic view of information management, information governance, and I think that's a good thing. I think there's a huge amount of interest right now, especially but not exclusively on the technology side, for how do we streamline and automate? You know, if that's the two buzzwords I tell my students at my classes, if there's one thing we can beat into your heads, streamline and automate. Recognizing that the technologies are by no means perfect, but in many ways they can be better than what your non-IM focused people, everybody else in the organization, what they do. And so if you can have the systems doing 60, 70, 80% of the work and have your experts, your subject matter experts doing the other 20, 30%, that's a pretty good approach. In terms of specifics, we do have this little shindig going on in San Diego next week. I'll be teaching the electronic at AIM 15 in San Diego on, I gotta look at the calendar now, on Tuesday, and then and part of that is going to be some of the new content that we've written when we updated the course this past couple of months on automating records identification, classification, and ultimately disposition.
Fantastic. For my part, my motto has always been simple is elegant, and so I've learned organically through my implementations, and especially in the past 8 years, how to work with business users so that they are relieved at the idea that the information governance expectation from them is not so steep that it is either disconcerting or confusing or just simply too much against their everyday workload. So if that's probably the one positive thing, and I'm personalizing it greatly, but I have learned lessons that make it easier for the business user to adopt the information governance framework that naturally, organically over time develops. And so I think sometimes the best step for the industry is, or the best step in anything, is to start with yourself. And I'm as excited about having original data, original metrics around user adoption that will be shared in a book later this year. So that's exciting for me. That's my comment on the positive comment on the industry as well as my experience. And I want to again thank CMSWire very kindly. I want to thank Chris Walker, who worked so diligently through our Hangout to participate with us on Twitter. His final thoughts, by the way, are regarding our last question. This is still the same old problems. The best outcome is the scandal elevates the conversation. And I think, if anything, this Hangout has proven exactly that.
Yeah.
That we are so interested in continuing this conversation. And I know as the story develops over the next week, we will not forget this. This is something that will stay in our memories as we work through the ramifications of information governance in the next 5 years, 10 years. This was a stellar moment, and I'm so pleased that we could capture some of this in this panel, this talented panel of
Shout out though for Lawrence, since he couldn't join us. There was some technical difficulties, and Lawrence Hart, we love you and we wish you could have been part of this because we wanted to hear your viewpoints. Hopefully we can make that happen somewhere at a future date. But he definitely needs to be part of this conversation if we ever revisit.
Absolutely. My thanks to the panel, my thanks to Siobhan Fagan of CMSWire, my thanks to CMSWire. You guys were brilliant, and I so appreciate that you stayed with us despite the technical difficulties. Thank you very much. Sorry about the delayed response, but as always, it's been a privilege. Thank you so much.